Okay, so this Stephen Lee essay explained the political conflict in Germany between 1914 and 1919 is a pretty key essay. Um, it's a very, very good essay. It's more detailed than um, the other Stephen Lee essays, and for that reason, I will dedicate two, possibly even three podcasts to taking you through the key points. Um, the reason it's a good essay is it uh, focuses in particular on the political conflict in Germany between in World War One. Okay, so there was a previous Stephen Lee essay with a similar title, but that was a more general essay. And that one only went up to 1918, the end of the war, which is the second reason I like this one, because it actually takes it through into 1919, and therefore, in a sense, it bridges this topic with the other one, which is was there a German Revolution 1918 to 1919, for which I have already recorded you a podcast. So it's in a sense, look at this as one of a package of Stephen Lee essays, but very, very useful. Now the way he approaches it is he works his way through the war chronologically. Okay, so starts at the beginning and works his way through the events, analysing the key features. So what I'll do is I'll walk and talk you through the key points that he makes. Okay, so as you can see, he starts off then looking at the situation before 1914, the political instability, of which I've already recorded a couple of podcasts on previous essays that look at this in detail. So just the essential points. Before the outbreak of war, the long-term stability of the Second Reich was threatened by two deep fault lines. And I remember one of the reasons that we use Stephen Lee is he does capture very quickly with little turns of phrase um, the key points. So using the same language, it's a nice expression, that two deep fault lines. Um, what were they? The conflict between the authoritarian rule of the elites. Now, the elites, remember, are the old elites, the Prussian Junkers, the landowners, and the new elites, the industrialists. Okay, and the frustrated liberalism of the middle classes. Now, remember, what we mean by frustrated liberalism is that they had been denied uh, uh, democracy had been denied to them in unification. It was very much an authoritarian system, although with liberal concessions. But the key thing is the middle classes lacked that upward mobility, that ability to become the ruling elites. Largely because the industrialists, the upper level of the middle class, rallied together with the old elites. Secondly, the fear that the landed and industrial elites had of the rapid growth of a mass working class. And of course, remember there, it's the 1912 Reichstag elections where the Social Democrats became the largest party. Okay, so that's the political instability before 1914. Moving on. Now, obviously, initial unity, Bergfrieden. Okay, that's a new bit of information there. It translates as peace within the fortress. Okay, the political parties and social classes put aside their differences. So the SPD supported the war effort. They believed the war would result in the recognition of the worth of the workers. The middle classes were enthusiastic. They thought it would result in the full integration of Prussia into a more democratic Germany and the creation of a people's army. So both those points were developed in the previous Stephen Lee essay that I've already done a podcast on, which was about the effect of World War One on Germany. Moving on, military dictatorship. Okay, so victory, of course, did not materialise. Okay, so the anticipated Schlieffen Plan, which the whole German war aim hinged upon, failed. Okay, and again, I've done a podcast on that one now as well. So Germany ended up fighting a two-front war, failed to break through in the west. The war was prolonged, and that is obviously a key factor, because the morale of the German people was completely dependent on a quick victory. Okay, so the longer the war went on, the greater the impact on German morale. So power passed from the Kaiser to the OHL under Hindenburg and Ludendorff. The civilian government was increasingly marginalised, okay, eventually resulting in the resignation of Chancellor Bettmann Hollweg in June 1917. Now again, you've got the notes on all of that in Leighton, from Leighton and Collier, so revisit your notes for the details on that. Initially, Ludendorff and Hindenburg insisted on total mobilisation for all-out victory, so the auxiliary law, the Hindenburg plan, and so on and so forth. But then, in September 1918, the OHL advised the Kaiser to hand political power to a broader-based government led by a new Chancellor, Prince Max of Baden. Okay, so those are the key features of the military dictatorship. Moving on. What were the reasons for that? Okay, the reasons. Well, there were three main reasons for this sudden change of direction. Okay, so learn these three reasons. First of all, impending military defeat. Remember, Germany had allies, okay, in World War I. The three main allies, Bulgaria, Turkey and Austria. Now on the 23rd of September, Bulgaria surrendered. Okay, her other allies, Turkey and Austria, were on the verge of doing the same. So that now became clear that the war could no longer be won. Okay, now I think that perception that the war was going to be lost had been mounting even before then. Of course, obviously, American troops had been joining in the fighting on the Western Front, but to some extent the Germans had hopes had been lifted because they had defeated Russia and had moved troops over to the Western Front to take on, and of course remember Operation Michael, that big German attack in March 1918, but of course that fell into retreat. So now in September, Germany's allies are starting to surrender. Okay, so as a result, it was no longer possible to justify to the German people the fact that 2.4 million war dead, included by 1918, and including 293,000 civilian deaths in 1918 alone. So that justification, remember, the in terms of Germany's war aims, the reasons for going to war were all about a quick victory in 1914. Now, nearly 4 years later, there's no justification. Okay, so you're starting to see mass desertions from the army, soldiers, receiving messages about the Spanish flu back home and their anxieties for their loved ones back home, etc., etc. So effectively, we're moving towards a potentially revolutionary situation, such as already happened in Russia. Okay. Second reason for the sudden change in direction was the attitude of the USA, the refusal of the Allies, particularly Woodrow Wilson, to negotiate with the leaders of Germany, because the leaders of Germany were a military dictatorship. Woodrow Wilson would only negotiate a surrender with a government that represented fully the German people. So then, crucially, the decision was made, in particular by Ludendorff within the OHL, that this was an opportunity to deflect the blame for Germany's defeat away from the elites, okay, who had of course caused the war and led the war, and deflect that blame towards the liberals and the socialists, okay, who Ludendorff felt were causing the collapse of Germany's war effort, okay, with the growth of revolutionary propaganda and defeatism on the home front. Okay, so deflect the blame for Germany's defeat away from the elites towards the liberals. Okay, and this, of course, this decision then to absolve the elites of responsibility by passing power over to other people is, of course, the beginning of the stab of the back myth. Okay. E, the October reforms, but again we're just moving on, the October reforms. So, power has now been handed over, okay, to Prince Max. The OHL are washing their hands, saying we don't want to take full responsibility anymore. So power has been handed back over to a civilian government. But again, we've covered this, it was very much too little too late, and it was a compromise. It was not enough. They're giving power to a prince. It's still one of them, still one of the elites. Prince Max became the new chancellor, a good, well-meaning person, and of course the October reforms was his major concession. So the chancellor now had to have the confidence of the Reichstag. That was the first key strand of the October reform, that the constitutional change, the Chancellor was now accountable to the Reichstag. And the Reichstag was also responsible for the actions of the Kaiser, the military and naval command, and the conclusion of treaties. So what the October reform did is it brought about a significant constitutional change by pushing power downwards, but it didn't change the constitution enough, because it still basically was the same structure. It was still the Kaiser, it was still a member of the elites who was the chancellor. So it was not enough. Number two, the moderate parties in the Reichstag, which included most of the SPD, hoped that the October reforms would be enough, would be sufficient to bring about a quick end to the war, without Germany being punished and avoiding internal collapse. Okay, so there is an argument, a case, that the October reforms could have worked because there were sufficient members of the Reichstag who were grateful to that. They did not want to get rid of the Kaiser. Okay, they saw this as a great opportunity. But what was crucial, if the October reforms were going to work, was that the war ended quickly. Okay, without Germany being punished and without an internal collapse. Now, there were three main problems that made the reforms unworkable. Okay, three main problems. So again, learn these three. First of all was the attitude of the Allies. They were not convinced that Germany had become a genuinely democratic regime. The attitude of the Allies: we will only negotiate if we feel that the new regime is genuinely representative, and they were not convinced with the October reforms. So as a result, the Allies delayed the discussions about an armistice. Now, eventually that armistice was agreed on the 11th of November, but that 4 or 5 week delay gave time and space within Germany for the revolutionary groups to organise themselves, and for that internal pressure against the new government to continue to build up. So by the time the November armistice was agreed upon, the situation was not the same as it had been 4 weeks earlier when the October reform had been proposed. So there was growing disillusionment within Germany at the lack of any economic or social reforms. Okay, if Prince Max had introduced economic or social reforms straight away, then arguably that might have taken the pressure off him and the Kaiser could have survived. But that 4 or 5 week delay in which nothing seemed to be happening was crucial. Okay, in particular there was resentment against labour regulations and housing conditions. The Army and the Navy made a last-ditch attempt to pursue a new offensive, and that was a crucial miscalculation. By, for example, ordering the German Navy to put to sea in a final showdown against the British. That decision proved to be a volatile trigger that triggered revolutionary pressures from below. Okay, so As I say, Prince Max was given power in October 1918. If he had immediately introduced economic reforms, social reforms, and if crucially he hadn't made that decision to have one last ditch attempt at winning the war, then it is possible that the Reichstag and the revolutionary pressures might not have built up and that the Kaiser could have survived. But unfortunately, he delayed, he did not introduce economic reforms, and he made that attempt at a final offensive, which triggered the revolutionary pressures from below. Now, at that point, I'll stop this first podcast and I'll move into the second podcast because I've run out of time. Okay, so we're up to the end of section E. Thank you.